Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our spring lunch and learn. I am so excited for today's discussion on the process of creating the Rock County Race to Equity report. Couple reminders before we get started. This conversation is being recorded, so those who were not able to join us will be able to log on at a future date and view our discussion, and then they can always submit questions to me, and I will work to get those answered. If you are not asking a question or sharing a comment, please make sure that you remain muted so that we can hear our speakers loud and clear. And at the end, I will put my contact information in the chat. If you or your organization or an organization that you are not currently a part of, but you think would be great to do an interview as a part of our Race to Equity Rock County report, please do reach out and let me know so that we can follow up. All right. So today I'm so excited to welcome Erica Nelson, the Race to Equity Director, and Stephanie Munoz, Project and Community Advocate for Race to Equity. And I will give each of these fantastic women a chance to unmute and share a little bit about themselves. We'll go into some questions that I have for them about the report. And I am so looking forward to participant engagement. So my chat is open. If you would like to ask a question, to share a comment, please put a question mark in the chat and I will know to call on you so you can unmute and share. Or if you just want to type your question out in the chat, I will do that and our guests can respond. If there is a question that is somewhat sensitive in nature that you don't want to publicly share, please do direct message me. I will share the content, but not the author of the question. All right. So without further ado, Erica, please unmute and tell us a little bit about yourself and your work with Race to Equity.
Sure. Good morning-ish or good afternoon, everyone. It still seems like morning. It's like chilly and cold. Thank you all for being here. I'm Erica Nelson. I am the Race to Equity Director and also the Advocacy Director for Kids Forward. Race to Equity is a project of Kids Forward. Kids Forward is a statewide public policy organization that works on a number of different issues in the state of Wisconsin, including juvenile justice, criminal justice, education, working on the state budget, healthcare, early childhood education, sort of all across the board on stuff that's relevant to public policy. And Race to Equity is a project of this organization that is about 7 or 8 years old at this point, which seems unbelievable to me. It's a long time. I'm sure that we'll talk more in depth about it, but my personal background is I'm a trained attorney, though I'm not practicing, and I represented parents who were accused of abuse and neglect in the foster care system in New York City, in Manhattan, for a few years before coming back home to Madison and Wisconsin. So I'll hand it over to Stephanie.
Buenos dias, Stephanie Munoz, she, her, hers, ella pronouns. I have been with Race to Equity 4, 5 years now. Holy cats, 5 years this summer, I think, 4 or 5, 4. And a little bit about myself, just so you know who's in this square with you. Outside of my work at Kids Forward, I am deeply engaged in animal rescue. I always have 1,010 dogs in my house of all size and forms and needs. I'm the mother of a lovely, wonderful 2-year-old who runs my entire world. And I live in the Madison area with my partner and our resident dog, who's a big white husky, and our kiddo. The whole world has shifted on its axis in the past year. And in the past year, we have found that we just really enjoy doing things outside and just spending time as we can as a family. We also enjoy car trips to Target. For a little while in the pandemic, that was our major form of entertainment, was driving over to pick up an order. back when we couldn't really leave our houses. But all that aside, what has brought me to Kids Forward and Race to Equity? I am a social worker by trade. So I got my MSW at UW-Madison. I am a transplant to Madison, originally from the Los Angeles area. And originally, I was supposed to be a social worker that was doing case management and serving predominantly the Latino community. I think in moving from the LA area where my whole world was like me and in Spanish, and then moving to a space where there was zero language access is what it felt like. I kind of became committed to serving my community. And at the time, really identified social work as the only avenue of doing so. And we'll talk more about how that kind of landed me in the policy realm.
Thank you, Erica and Stephanie. And now, Angela, if you could unmute yourself. Angela Moore is our YWCA Rock County Executive Director. And if you could just share kind of a brief history of the YWCA Rock County's partnership with Kids Forward and how we got started with the Race to Equity report, that would be great.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you, Amy. I knew about some incredible research that the Annie Casey Foundation funded and conducted in the past. So when I joined the YWCA 7 years ago as the executive director, I did so based on our powerful mission of eliminating racism and empowering women. And based on that, one of the first calls that I made within my 2 weeks of onboarding, and you all know when you start a new job that is pretty ambitious, your first 2 weeks are critical and you are immersed in all kinds of other critical phone calls. But one of the first phone calls I made during that first 2 weeks was to the Annie Casey Foundation to see if they had some research that would apply to Wisconsin, particularly to South Central Wisconsin, where we are located. My premise was if we could support our efforts with data and needed gaps in our community, that would certainly leverage our decisions and others to come on board to support us. And they did not have anything for Wisconsin, but they told me that Kids Forward, now Kids Forward, was working on a report, a race to equity report, and they asked me to contact Erica Nelson. So Erica and I finally connected after some time playing phone tag, and we were able to connect in such a way that we thought it would be a good idea for her to present some of her preliminary findings at our first racial justice conference, which was held in 2015. So that was a powerful session. We could envision how that might affect us, that we could make decisions based on data, based on research, based on needs in our community, based on interviews, etc. So we've been on this journey with Kids Forward since that time when they had an opportunity to apply for a grant. They asked us to come to the table, and we did. We've been a part of this, I would say, since 2015/16. So I cannot wait for us to have the report, because I think that will be something that we can say that we provided to Rock County that really captures our needs and what our vision is and what the possibilities are in the area of racial justice. So please put any questions in your chat based on my comments. Welcome, Erica. Welcome, Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. So we're going to jump right in it. In the spirit of full disclosure, I've generated some questions that I want us to form our discussion around, but please do use that chat and I will integrate participant questions in with our discussion. And hopefully we're gonna have some really rich and robust dialogue around the Race to Equity Rock County report. So the first question, how did you begin your work with Race to Equity? If there's anything you would like to add, Erica and Stephanie, and then adding on to that, what surprised you most about either the creation of the Race to Equity Dane County report or the reception of that report.
All right, thanks. Thanks for the questions to guide us, Amiee. I appreciate that. So I, interestingly enough, as an undergrad at UW, was an intern at what was then the Wisconsin Council on Children and Families, and had left to sort of live on the East Coast in Brooklyn, New York for a number of years, and then came back here with my family, and wanted to be a practicing attorney in some regard, but really what was interesting about that was that there didn't seem to be many opportunities for someone with my experience doing something that was considered a little sort of out of the norm, which was actually representing parents aggressively who were accused of abuse and neglect. But so I was looking at, being a public defender, an assigned public defender. And also while I was like returning back to Madison 10, 12 years later, I was trying to figure out why it wasn't as diverse as it should be given the time span that had taken place between when I left and I returned. Moreover, there were all these different siloed community conversations about what was happening with respect to disparities in the criminal justice system, which was the first I heard of that. I was hearing it through my lawyer friends back here saying, hey, look, this is what's happening here. There were conversations in the school district about the achievement gap or the opportunity gap between African-American children and white children. There were conversations about the high rates of African-American children in foster care. And all these things kept on popping up in sort of my day-to-day existence as I was reacclimating and looking for opportunities back here in Madison and Dane County. And it occurred to me that maybe there was some kind of underlying connection in these disparities and that there had been prior reports done, but maybe using resources through folks like the Annie Casey Foundation and their annual Kids Count report, which looks at well-being measures for children and families across the nation and then narrows them down to states. It's called Kids Count. So it turns out that the Kids Count organization was the statewide version of that was the Wisconsin Council on Children and Families, my old place I interned. I went to them and said, I have this idea. I'm really curious about what's going on here. Can we start by collecting data and not just general data on the county, but can we start by doing it disaggregated by race? And the consequence of that was the Race to Equity report that was released at a YWCA Racial Justice Summit in 2013. And the report was, it covered probably 40 plus indicators of well-being, comparing the African Americans to whites in Dane County. It was definitely a report that was sort of built on prior reports, but the difference with this one was twofold, I think. One was that it encompassed all domains, right? So family structure, wealth, economic well-being, healthcare, criminal justice system, education indicators. So it was all under one umbrella. And what we found was that there were high rates of disparities on every single indicator that we looked at, which made the point that it wasn't just in this one area, it was across the board, and that these things were all connected. The other aspect of the report that I think was unique was that before we published anything, we spent time talking to people about what they thought the data meant and trying to get context about particular indicators. So we would speak to stakeholders and systems, we spoke to community folks, we had conversations with boards, we had conversations with elected officials about what the data meant to them, right? Because it's really important to not release data by itself without the context surrounding it, because given what the data was, it was likely in a community that was majority white to just reinforce stereotypes that folks had, right? So it had to be contextualized. And so that's sort of how the Race to Equity report came about. And it was really fairly organic. One conversation led to another conversation that led to another group that led to another perspective. And we spent probably a year and a half, my former colleague and I, Tori Wen, spent all this time just absorbing like sponges information that then we put out in this report. And one, we found that we had some of the highest racial disparities in the nation. And that African-American folks here were doing worse on average than African-American folks elsewhere in the state. And part of the reason that the disparities were so vast was because white people in Dane County on average were doing better than white people nationally, right? So they're sort of pulling at either ends of the sort of well-being spectrum, right? That's what we got this vast gap. And one, what surprised me after the release of the report, and then I'll let Stephanie pick up, was that one, folks actually read it and paid attention, because I thought this was like some thing that we were doing that might be useful. I did not have any expectation of what the consequences of it were, which was that all of a sudden, two things happened. It validated what African-American folks had been saying in this community for decades and been asking folks to pay attention to, but they didn't necessarily have the tools, like the quantitative, hard factual data to back up what they were experiencing. So that it was used as a tool in that way. And it fundamentally burst the bubble of white folks who were sort of relying on the status quo of Madison and Dane County's constant high ranking of being at the top of everything, right? And so those two pieces together, it got a lot more traction than I had anticipated, and almost immediately. And so to me, that was very surprising. And I was also surprised at various times on the pushback. So there was a period of time where it did not make people, there had to be an acceptance period. And there was pushback from various folks about how well we did the data. You know, there were differences, you know, things that in the larger context were irrelevant, right? Like if you're comparing African-American kids being 14 times more likely to be poor than whites versus 13 times more likely to be poor, you're not paying attention to the right thing, right? We're just like, you know, focusing on the wrong part of the problem that's being highlighted. And the problem in that case, and that indicator was, we have a crisis on our hands in terms of African-American child poverty. And we don't need to split hairs of whether it's 13 times or 14 times. It's just shameful. So I think those three things were probably the most surprising. And so I'll hand it over to Stephanie.
Thank you. How did I begin my work with Race to Equity, and what surprised me most about the report, right? Well, how did I begin my work with Race to Equity? I always joke that I was a Race to Equity fangirl. I was actually in the audience with little old Erica, was up on the podium reading off these numbers, and I was a student. Like, I remember the feeling of sitting there and like taking notes and being like, what did she just say? Another one? Another, like, it was, you were sitting in the audience and these numbers are just like hitting you like the waves in the ocean, right? Like, I'm just like, oh my God, like here in Madison, in Dane County. And remember, I'm a transplant. And so, right, all I hear is that this is a fantastic place and it's so great for children and families, and we have great food and bike paths, and it's beautiful, and such a great university. And so I'm sitting in the audience and I'm like, what's happening? Who is this person? What are they talking about? And it was a concurrent theme throughout the summit that year. And so there were several workshops, and I followed it the whole way through. I was in every workshop that Erica and Tori were in. And then there was a strategy session after hours that you could stay in, and I stayed at that. And it just really pulled at me in such a unique way because of the way that it was presented. And I still brag even amongst my team that I have one of the original books in my hands. It's moved with me across several houses and journeys. And so, here I am studying to be a social worker, and I am thinking about what is this, if this is what they're saying about this is what life looks like for folks that I'm working alongside, what does that mean for the work that I'm doing? And as I'm listening to this and learning about this, I'm also experiencing my work with community, where I am working with folks that are giving everything their all the time and are bumping up against these systems, right? They are navigating not having access to housing, not because they don't have a job or because they can't keep a house, but because there isn't affordable housing that is available to them. Or, they're navigating challenges with their children in school, not because they aren't good parents, but because they don't have access to the things that they need in order to be the parents that they are trying to be. And the system's not really understanding that, right? I'm navigating maybe a teacher's perspective about this family when I'm working with the family in the home, and I'm that's not really the picture that I see, but that's what you're seeing at school. And how do we navigate that, and what does that mean? And it was increasingly frustrating that it felt like I was never finding solutions for people. And yeah, I had individual wins here and there where maybe somebody got a job or somebody got an apartment or a family was unified. But overall, there was this overwhelming feeling of the work that we're doing every day feels useless and tireless because there is just something larger here. And so then I was able to connect the two, oh, well, maybe that stuff is connected to what I'm seeing with people in community every day. And so then in 2016, 17, as Angela said, this new opportunity came with Race to Equity around this policy work and community engagement work in other areas of the state. And I was really curious about what that might mean and how my work and experience as a social worker might intersect with community engagement and connecting the experience of community with data and outreach and analysis and assessment. And so I gave it a whirl, and I joined the team with the specific responsibility of focusing on this project, which is taking our work and taking the work that we did in Dane County and working to learn whether we can replicate it in other places in the state, and then to do the work of replicating. The interesting piece for me is that we're working under a grant that focuses on health equity because we're looking at the social determinants of health. We know that things like safe neighborhoods, access to education, those pieces impact the health and well-being of our communities. And so this grant was really unique because we work through that understanding in that lens, and we're working as technical assistance and support for communities across the state. And so since I've been there, we've been doing work in Rock County, and we've also done some work in the Fox Valley area, in the Appleton, Green Bay. And we're looking at other areas of the state in terms of where there might be support. We stay in connection with folks in Milwaukee, but they have a completely different set of folks and work that is being done. And so we stay in communication and kind of work alongside them. But our predominant communities have been Rock County and then the Fox Valley, Green Bay area. This is kind of unique because I think I can speak from a community perspective. What surprised me most about the report was hearing the connection to action. There were in our report recommendations immediately following with the roadmap. The other interesting pieces for me as a community member, because remember at this point I'm not working with Kids Forward, I'm a community member, was the investment. Like everybody was talking about it everywhere. There were restaurant owners that were like, I saw this report. And so I started a program where I was hiring people and teaching them how to do things. Everybody wanted a piece of the pie and was suddenly interested in working in how do they connect what they're doing with this big, heavy piece of information that they just received. And Erica spoke to this a little bit too, but what was also surprising to me was, I like how Erica put it, the acceptance period that we went through, folks like thinking that this was not true or not accurate, because as a social worker, I was seeing it every day. It wasn't contextualized in that way in the data, but I was seeing it firsthand all the time. And so to hear folks say like, no, here's the magazine article that says we are the top place to live for families, that's clearly wrong, was really interesting for me as a community member to watch this dialogue play out, particularly within the communities that I was part of, right? So I was a student in a higher ed setting. And so there were researchers and folks that were teaching us about how to work and navigate within these systems. And there was that bumping up against like, is this our reality and is it true and is it accurate, while simultaneously selling you the beauty of like being a Wisconsin Badger, right? Like, it's fantastic to be here and here's why you should work here. And so that was probably what surprised me most about seeing it unfold as a community member.
Ladies, thank you both for that feedback around that first question. And it's a really good segue to two questions that I've received in the chat. The first is, how long did it take to complete the Dane County report? And the second is, what is the most valuable outcome from the Dane County report that was approved for implementation?
So it took for the Dane County report, because nobody knew I was doing it, it took a lot. It took maybe a year and a half. But it was, it had the benefit of me having an idea, having no community pressure, and then sitting in a room and then putting all the pieces together in terms of the data at first, and then eventually branching out, right? So I'd say, let's see, 2011, no, maybe 2 years. 2 years before we launched the report. And wow, what is the biggest consequence of result of the report, I think is what?
Yeah, the second question, what is the most visible outcome from the Dane County report that was approved for implementation?
I think there's been a lot of stuff. I think it just depends on what you're talking about. There's been a lot, I'd say, and these are hard to like physically quantify in terms of implementation. I would argue that over the last 7 years, there has been probably over $10 million of investment with a focus on racial equity. And by that, I mean, it's coming from everywhere, right? And so whether that's in the arts space where people are looking for more racial equity, whether that's in funders, local funders like the bank, and other organizations and our United Way, the requirement now is that you're addressing racial equity. And in fact, this last year, in the last 6 months and in 2020, there have probably been, I would say, 4 or 5 local funders who have explicitly put out RFPs for, hundreds of thousands of dollars directed at addressing racial equity. And that has taken place over the years. There has been growing and growing momentum. And now we've reached sort of I think a very fantastic point where the philanthropic aspect of our community is actually very targeted around racial equity. I would say one of the other pieces that is most visible, that isn't like a direct result necessarily, but I think is connected to the beginning of the conversation. And that is that when we started the report, there were hardly any elected officials of color. And in the last 7 years, we have almost flipped the entire script on that, where we have them, I don't know, probably, I saw an article on this, probably half or more than half of the nonprofit leaders, plus our city council, plus our elected representatives are folks of color. When in a community that is predominantly white, in a county that's predominantly white. So now we have a completely different power structure in terms of who's sitting on boards, who's running nonprofits, who's sitting in city council, who's sitting on county board, that was not there 7 or 8 years ago. And that has implications that by far ripple way out beyond what our report initially did, because those folks in particular are setting agendas around racial equity. And so those are the two things that come to mind.
Excellent point. And I like the way both of you phrased it as the acceptance period after the report is released, and then you have that community response. And I am going to be interested to see when the perception of the community is incongruent with the report, what does that acceptance period look like? And when the perception of the community is potentially congruent with the results of the report, and see if there's any difference there between Dane County and Rock County. So that's something that I'm going to be looking for. So we're going to shift a little bit. Erica and Stephanie, half of the heart of this report is the interviews with community stakeholders. So if that's individuals or organizations, etc., what would you like for potential participants to know about their role in the overall Race to Equity Rock County report? How vital is that? What would you like for them to know?
I'll start us off here because I want to add on to some of the wins. And I want to highlight these because I want to give an idea of the possibilities. I think when I think about the work that we've done, it's really hard to say our report had a direct line to that exact piece. But when I think about the impact, I think about the fact that one of our biggest school districts, Madison Metropolitan School District, has a strategic plan centered on Black excellence. That was not the case when this report came out. And it is a direct result of these numbers calling out that system, shocking that system, and community rallying around that to say, hey, school district, you want to give me all your reports about how fantastic you're doing? Well, here's this one, and here's what this is saying, and here's how I am connected, and here's how I'm engaged, and here's how I'm committed, and let's come together. And so we saw in places like the school district, things happening like different committees, different boards, different folks getting engaged that then moved them to a place where they were able to develop a strategic plan centered around Black excellence. We have seen, as I said, as I said before, in so many places, sectors that were not at all engaged in racial equity, the restaurant work, arts, anything that you could imagine, there was a reimagining of how they could engage in this broader work of racial equity. And that, I think, directly connects to what we need from community and what we're hoping interviewees know about the report and their participation, is that this is truly an opportunity to voice your needs, your desires, your experience. Erica said this before, that one unique piece about Race to Equity is we're not unveiling anything new, right? So folks of color in Dane County and likely in Rock County have been speaking to what we're talking about for decades and have been speaking to it within their own communities, within government, to stakeholders, and have done organizing and advocating in different ways. This is what we have seen in Dane, and a unique opportunity to bring pieces together. So that's why the interview piece takes so long, because we're working across all sectors. We're working to engage stakeholders at every end so that we can maximize the opportunity for investment at the end. It's really an opportunity to share that experience, the perspective, to really bring together different pieces in terms of things that have been attempted. Those were pieces that we were able to bring. When I think about when we've spoken to stakeholders and we've brought forth these committees, opportunities to reimagine and re-envision are really key, and things that we like to bring forth within Race to Equity that we're hoping to bring forth and center in our ROC report, and that I think we've been able to do with Dane.
Eric, I have a question for Stephanie, actually, or maybe not a question. I just want to thank you, both you, Erica and Stephanie, for the work that you're doing. And the question is, I have had the opportunity to work with you, Stephanie. You came over to Beloit, and through the connection with Vicki Brown, when you were doing that report, you were trying to get to a specific demographic in Beloit. And your group solicited my help in order to get access to that particular group. I did help, and I facilitated, and I did the translation. And I actually was hesitant to collaborate with you from the very beginning because I didn't know the group, I didn't know the intentions, and I'm always wondering what's behind what you're trying to do, okay? And I'm just being honest. And then the collaboration was very positive. I enjoy getting to know you. I enjoy getting to know the work that you're doing. But there is one thing that made me uneasy. You did share with me the final report. And on the final report of the findings, your group chose to highlight different political figures at the time. So it made it seem like this work was coming on behalf of these people who at the time were in power. And I guess I was a little bit disappointed because I was not told from the very beginning that that's how the information was gonna be, I guess, shared. And what made me question the process is that I'm like you, I'm a transplant into the community. So I'm doing the work with these people. I get to know the real life struggles. I know what the issues are. And what I guess what caught me out of surprise is that the direct actions of the political figures highlighted on your report were not really in agreement with what they were actually doing to the community. So to me as a leader, it made me question if I should have collaborated with you in the first place, because it made it look like these individuals who were actually not helping the community were the ones that came out with this wonderful report. So much so that I was offered a stipend by your organization and I was afraid to receive it. I want nothing to do with those people and those names. So I just want to let you know I'm fearful sometimes to collaborate because it may be perceived like we're helping those individuals when we're really not. Just wanted to leave that out there. I don't expect any responses at this time, but that was my experience. And yeah, it makes me think twice.
Thank you for the feedback. That was a separate report, and Race to Equity is one piece of Kids Forward. And to be quite transparent, that is some of the work that we're grappling with as we move to work towards racial equity and anti-racism. Historically, what has given us success and what has moved our work forward has been our relationship with the legislator, has been our relationship with government officials, has been our reputation in those circles. That's one of the challenges with Race to Equity. That's one of the pieces of feedback that we got at Race to Equity in Dane County, right? You can tell Erica's a white woman, and we're talking about the experience of Black folks in this community. And so that is why we try to lean deeper into engaging with community and try to pull forth their perspective and their voice as much as possible, because we know that we're working on getting better, but we know historically they've been completely separate, right? We've got folks down at the Capitol making decisions and thinking that maybe they're making good decisions or intentionally making decisions that negatively impact folks. And they are completely separate from folks that are impacted by the decisions that are being made. Kids Forward and Race to Equity is working to bridge that. And that's what we have done to some degree with Race to Equity. But as we grapple with how do we lean into anti-racism, that begs that question to, is that possible? What does that look like? And how do we have conversations where we're maybe meeting in the middle? Is that possible? Does that make sense? Is that the right way to do it? And so that's a question that we hold. And so I greatly appreciate your feedback, because I think sometimes that understanding is a little lost, that we are currently at that intersection. We are not community organizers. We are not a community-based organization. And we are in relation with the state legislator and with larger systems. And that relationship and reputation has led us to some degree to some success in some areas. But what does that mean for the community and vice versa? And how do we balance that and grapple with that and navigate that? So thank you again for the feedback. And we will continue to pull that forward as we think about what this report looks like for Rock County.
Gina, go ahead.
So first I want to thank both of you, Erica and Stephanie, for the work that you have done on the report. And I just want to say that I have sat in, I always say I have 1 foot in Dane County, 1 foot in Rock County, with having a for-profit business in Madison and a nonprofit organization here in Rock County that works with Black business owners. And one of the things I have learned is that a lot of the leaders who lead very successful nonprofits in Dane County, where their focus is on Black business owners, or their focus is on working with the Black community, and that is their focus. One of the things that I struggled with was, how do I answer that question of, why is Rock County Jumpstart focusing only on Black business owners? And several of the Black leaders of nonprofits in Dane County have referred to the Race to Equity report. And they have said there's data that shows that there is gross racial disparities here, here, and here. And until those racial disparities no longer exist, my work focuses on the Black community. And when I was sitting in a presentation by Lisa Payton Care, and you folks know who she is, right? When she said that, that's when I said, that's going to be my answer. Until those racial disparities no longer exist, the work that Rock County Jumpstart does works with Black business owners only. And it's because the Black leaders in Dane County are referring to the data that comes from these reports that says that is why, because that is where the work is needed the most. Now, down the road, when that is not the case, that's fine. We can open our organizations to start to help everybody, but our efforts need to be here. That's where our efforts need to be. So a lot of us are referring to the data that you are collecting, because it kind of gives us that answer that we need when people keep asking us that, right? And it also gives us the data that we need when we're talking to funders and they ask us that question, right? So it really has helped us a lot as far as being leaders of nonprofits to be able to answer that question when they do ask us, well, why are you only doing this with the Black community? So I really appreciate the report and the work that you're doing, because I can really lean into that because I get that question a lot. So I appreciate it from my own personal, for myself personally. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that feedback, Gina. So just a quick check-in to everyone. If you do have a question or if you would like to share a comment, I can't see all of the hands raised.
I can't hear Amy. Did I lose everyone, or is it just Amy?
No, can everyone else hear me? Okay. I think that might be your connection, Gina. Hopefully you can get that going so you can hear everything. If you do have a question or a comment, please either put a question mark in the chat or type your question out, and then I'll know to call on you. I just don't want to miss anyone because I can't see everyone that is present in the meeting because we do have 2 screens. So I just wanted to put that out there. I didn't want anyone to feel ignored if you're raising a hand and I can't see it. Next question. Erica and Stephanie, what is your vision for the best possible community response to the Race to Equity Rock County report after it is released? And by that, I mean, what do you want organizations, businesses, individuals to do once they've digested the report? What changes would you envision seeing in policy and in practice? And then let's just start there. So what would be the best case scenario of action after this report is released?
Okay, well, I'm just gonna be honest. I'm a little more pessimistic as of late than I might have been in the past. So one of the things when I read the question, I was like, oh, I have like my regular answer. And then this morning, I'm like, you know, I think that one of the best responses right now would be that it actually matters. If people agree that they care about it and it matters, as opposed to outrightly dismissing it. That would be a great community response. The second great community response would be not to use it as, I think things, as we all know, are super divisive and supercharged, like supercharged with feelings, and all of it's right, but it's also supercharged, you know, with anger as well. And I think that if the response to this report is one that doesn't increase that, but rather brings people together by agreeing that this matters, that would be, in this moment, I think, a huge win. And then if as a consequence, you know, the community comes together to devise a plan, create task forces, create folks that are working on it, agree to collaborate, agree to not blame. I mean, that was like that's a big thing, right? Like, oh, it's not me, it's the police department. And the police department is like, no, it's not me, it's the community that's not doing anything for their kids. Like, that's not the response that you want. The response is about, well, I'm gonna take some accountability or a lot of accountability about what is in my lane, right? And what I can control and what my role is to play in addressing the things that I can do better on when it comes to racial equity, and then working with others. But Stephanie, speak to your 3, hitting it on, you know, just 3 big points.
Yeah, I think Erica gave the long-winded answer to my short answer, that is connection, investment, and action. But that's also the perspective of me, who lives and works and does my life in Dane County. And so I challenge you all to ask that for yourselves, right? As folks that live, work, thrive in Rock, what does that look like for you? And it's our role to help facilitate and walk alongside you all in that.
So the other portion that I was trying to make come to mind that wouldn't, when I was asking you the second part of that question, is what has been your experience in Dane County of what accountability looks like after the report? So, and Erica, I love your like realistic response is that, one, I want it to matter, because I think if we can't get past that, I don't know where else we go if it doesn't matter. So thank you for pointing that out. What are ways that accountability has shown up after the release of this report in Dane County that we might hope to reflect here in Rock County?
Yeah, thank you for that follow-up. I really appreciate Gina's perspective and experience. I think that's what accountability looks like. I think unfortunately, it has taken some numbers on a paper that people can like hold with them and bring along with them as they're having these discussions and these conversations. But that's what accountability looks like. It looks like folks diving in, committing, and saying, this is what we're doing. And actually, part of this report, which if you look at the Race to Equity baseline report, doesn't include this piece because we did the baseline or the roadmap as a separate piece. But for Rock County, we're going to integrate them together. The roadmap actually had specific indicators. By this year, we will be here with this number, right? That's what that looks like. And who knows, if there's enough investment, then maybe there's going to be another report and we're 10 years out almost with Race to Equity date. And so we will see in terms of where we're at with numbers and improvement and action.
Perfect. So again, if you have questions or comments for Erica or for Stephanie, please do continue to put those in the chat. Erica, so we have about 8 minutes left. I want to do a couple quick announcements. What is it important for us to know to prepare ourselves for this report? There is still time to engage in the work of participating. What things are pertinent that we have not yet discussed that we want to leave our audience with as a part of this discussion?
Okay, I think that one, I mean, I think everybody's probably prepared for people not necessarily liking it because of what the results are going to be. But I think what's crucial in that is one of the tools that we use, which I hope we'll be able to figure out how to use prior to the sort of more formal release in Rock County, is that folks will have each other's backs and then reinforce each other's perspectives, right? So we went out there knowing that this would upset people, but we also knew that we had a group of folks who had seen the data before we released it, talked to us before we released it, believed that we were doing the right thing, so that they were the backup. We weren't constantly by ourselves saying, oh, like, no, really, like this is true. We actually had folks and champions in the community who were well known in their areas in the community to say, yes, this is how it is. And this does reflect the reality. I think that's important that you do that for each other and, you know, sort of reinforce each other's perspectives and truth, because, you know, the only action that can go forward is if not everybody's going to have the exact same opinion about how to go about it. But if the baseline of the shared value is that you think this matters and you want to make improvement and you want to work together, that is the glue that I think that is really important to think about as you go into it. And it's not a zero-sum game. People aren't gonna, if you do this work, doesn't mean someone else is losing out. It means that you're fundamentally working to change the community going forward. And it not thinking of it as you're losing out because someone else is doing something or someone else. It's not an oppression Olympics. So it's none of those things. It's really about a tool to have the conversations to then move the agenda forward as an entire county with the shared goal, really. So keeping that in mind as we move forward into the fall and the end of the year. Stephanie?
I think we've covered it.
Perfect. So my final question for this spring lunch and learn is, who should participate? If people are in the audience and I don't know if I have anything to contribute, are they speaking to me when they're asking for participation in these interviews and providing context to the data? Or will I work with this group, but I don't know if they should be included? What would you like for people to know if they're not quite sure if I should be participating and how?
For me, the easy answer is everyone. We need all perspectives as we bring this together. Amiee, although she is fantastic and has great connections, and Angela and the work that YWCA, I think about, I wasn't even there, but it's a story that has stayed with me. I think about a group of young boys in a neighborhood on the South Side that had an opinion, right? Teenagers that probably didn't think they were connected and should be engaged, but somehow we got connected to them, and there was huge impact for them and their community because of their experience. They wanted a basketball court in their neighborhood and they were like, how do we go about this? And somehow the string was pulled along the line and they were able to get connected with Tori. And so anyone and everyone who is in connection with community, if you live in Rock County, if you work in Rock County, if you live alongside folks in Rock County, I think at the baseline, at the very minimum, let us know who we're missing. If you feel like maybe I'm not the person that has the perspective, but here's who you might have. The worst case scenario is Amiee already knows them and we've got them. Best case scenario is we've picked up another perspective that we were missing. And then best case scenario is spend some time with us, chat with us, and let us know your perspective and your feedback. We won't be able to gather absolutely everything in our finalized piece, but we are hoping to gather as much as we can, absolutely.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And what we do with the information is we don't necessarily put your name on it. What we're doing is we're sort of digesting and creating themes and opinions and perspectives that allow us to give useful context to the data. Like, why does this disparity exist? What are people already doing about it? How do they feel about it? And yeah, and I'd like to give is Vicky still on? So giving Vicky a shout out for all the connections that she has helped us make in over the years on this report. So if Amiee doesn't already know them, I'm pretty positive Vicky already does. So just wanted to say hi, Vicky, too, before we end. So yeah.
Thank you, ladies. And the final point that I'll add to that, and I've talked to people in a lot of different sectors, and in the educational sphere throughout Rock County, the process of what I do is I meet with the organization. And sometimes it's one person, sometimes it's a couple people. We meet for about an hour and I ask questions. And then I clean up my notes. I send the notes to them. This is not a gotcha moment. This is not a way to say, oh, this organization is doing a horrible job and this is how they could be better. So I'm very transparent. And these are the notes that I took from what you shared with me. Are there things that I got wrong? Are there things that need additional context? Would you like to speak to someone else in your organization and add their perspective in? And the only thing that I ask is that they document everyone that they spoke to in the, kind of the co-creation of the notes so that we can track who we were in contact with to procure this information. And I got an email from a participant, and I'm paraphrasing, but it said, yeah, you got the notes right, but who's going to see this? Because out of context, this might sound really bad. And I assure that individual, I said, well, the information could very well be made public, but it is not going to be attached to you specifically or to your specific school district. But we do want to highlight that this is something that's happening within our school districts in Rock County, because that's critically important for us to know so that we can move towards more equitable communities in schools, et cetera. And they were fine with that, but that reassurance was needed, is that, yeah, this will be made public, but no, it will not be traced back to a specific individual or organization, because I think that the fear of that will put up a barrier and we won't have that transparency. And I would just like to give a thank you for everyone who has participated in the report thus far. Everyone has been so open and so transparent and so willing to provide additional information or answer follow-up questions. And I am optimistic that that will continue. So we have shifted to the writing portion of the report, but I am still able to meet with individuals or with organizations So as a final point, I did put my email address in the chat. Please reach out if you or someone you know is interested in participating. We are at 1 o'clock. Thank you everyone for spending an hour with us. We hope that this was time well spent, and we hope that you know more now about the process of creating the Race to Equity Rock County report. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.